everyone to the New York Alternative Investment Monthly Call for July 2020. I am Robert Atkinson of Mirai Asset Securities Prime Brokerage, the moderator of the panel today. I am very pleased to welcome back a good friend of the Investment Roundtable, Russ Summers of Baker Tilly. Russ has been with us before, I should say, and today he will address a very timely topic, one that has impact on all of us in many different ways, and that is navigating cybersecurity in the new normal, how smaller firms can be prepared. Just by way of introduction, Russ is a senior manager at Baker Tilly with over 12 years experience in the field of public accounting, risk advisory, information technology, and cybersecurity as it relates to financial services and other highly regulated industries. In his role at Baker Tilly, he has led a broad array of projects, including cybersecurity consulting, regulatory compliance consulting, internal controls advisory, internal audit, information technology audit and risk assessment, vendor risk management and enterprise risk management, and of course, last but not least SOC reporting. So I can think of few people better than Russ Summers to come in and address this very important and sensitive issue. Before we begin, I do want to thank our sponsors, without whose support none of this would be possible. And of course, our sponsors include Alston Bird, Baker Tilly, Bloomberg, Deloitte, Grant Thornton, New Mountain Capital, Mirai Asset Securities, Kaya, Department for International Trade of the United Kingdom, and finally, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office here in New York. So just as to sort of set the stage for our conversation with Russ, I think it's fair to say that we live in a very topsy-turvy world these days. Whoever would have thought when the calendar changed from 2019 to 2020 that things would be so upside down as they are, whether it be global affairs, domestic politics, social unrest, the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Without question, the COVID-19 virus has had an impact on our lives and careers, no question about that. As we all know, in response to the pandemic, many companies, if not most, have implemented work from home type mandates. As our homes and workplaces have merged into one, the stresses on our respective cybersecurity programs have changed, from strains on bandwidth and significant increases in virtual private network traffic to an overload of communications from both employers and external sources, as well as logistical strains of workplace sharing and distance learning needs of family members. The average day of the American worker has been changed significantly. This new business environment has shifted and heightened cybersecurity risks. So the discussion we're looking for Russ to lead us on today is intended to give us a better understanding of how this is all going to shake out. And perhaps most importantly, what steps we need to do to protect ourselves from a cybersecurity standpoint. So Russ Summers, given our current working environment, how has cybersecurity changed?
Oh my. So I guess first and foremost, thanks Bob for the introduction. I'm sure someone put that together, and I was listening to it. I'm like, wow, who's this guy you're talking about? I was like, oh, crap,
it's actually you, Russ. It's you.
Yeah,
it is you.
I got to live up to that and deliver to it. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Just right out of the gate, right? Global pandemic, massive social unrest and protests in major cities, political instability to the nth degree, new regulations that are emerging, whether it's financial services specific or state specific, I mean, really, like dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria, right? I mean, just lots and lots and lots of stuff, right? So I'll just give you, my take on it and what I've seen, and we'll go from there, right? So, I mean, the most obvious, or first things first, I think it's 65 or 70% of businesses in the U.S. Switch to a primary work from home model. Living in the New York metro area, I live in New Jersey. Try to work out of New Jersey as much as possible, but we have offices in New York and a lot of other metro areas, obviously super hard hit during the global pandemic. And I mean, shutdowns for the foreseeable future. The amount of office space in New York City right now that sits empty is just absolutely deafening. But what I can say is, right, as folks started to work from home, some companies got it right before this all started and had those models in place. Some had to adapt pretty quickly. But I think it's been a massive shift in perception, right, inside of an organization from the whole, who can work from home perception, right? Everybody's asking that question, like, well, who can work from home? And now the question has shifted to, well, who has to be in the office, right? Like that's a huge just mental shift for folks who grew up, you go to the office, you get in at 7:30, you stay till 5:30, you go through your commute home, and you've got that kind of start stop commute time, right, where you can kind of set yourself for the business day, and then you can kind of unset yourself for the business day and keep work you and home you separated. I think what happened is because that commute time has been nerfed for most people, so whether it was on a New Jersey Transit or Long Island Railroad train, a ferry, a subway, or you were even walking in, right, you had that kind of turn on off time, right, that allowed you to separate work and home. And now, we're living in our offices, right, or if you want to think of it in that way, right? Your commute is shorter, but you also realize how much you appreciated that time to be able to start, stop, and disconnect, right? And look, if you're in a family with, 2 working people and a couple of kids that were in school, right? You've got logistical concerns, you've got space concerns, you've got bandwidth concerns, you've got technology concerns and technology sharing issues, you've got all these other things that have popped off as a result of just the sheer logistics of moving from, your office to your house.
So Russ, if I could just jump in for a second, as you say what you just said, it strikes a chord with me personally. So here I am doing this call with you, and I do others like this throughout the normal course of my day. My wife has a business. She's doing Zoom calls constantly. My daughter has returned home, so she's operating from home. And recently we brought my 90-year-old father back from Florida, so he's living with us. And so the household, to your point, has taken on a completely different meaning. And it's been, I'll use this word, it's been reinvigorated in a completely, or reimagined in a completely different way. And it does put stress on a number of different facets of the household, as you described. So I think what you said, you just nailed it.
Yeah, and that's a call for another day. The whole, being able to separate your workday and the family dynamic and all that. That is, if anyone wants to cover that, I'm sure you can find a good one on it. But I'm definitely not the right person because I struggle with that day in and day out. It's just fighting for my own piece of the house so I can call it an office. But look, I think the folks that handled this successfully, right, were those who took their business continuity and disaster recovery tests, right, seriously. The folks who went through all the tabletop exercises and restore tests and industry-wide disaster recovery, SIFMA coordinated tests and things like that participated in all those things and took them seriously and took copious notes and tried to make their plan better and make it more actionable. I think as this environment changed, right, those are the folks who did well. I mean, I have one client who is very active, right? They do war games, they do disaster recovery, they do business continuity, they do incident response, they do red team exercises, purple team exercises, all this other stuff, right? And they asked me, they're like, well, who do you see that's like really responding well to this? And I'm like, you are, like, you guys are doing a great job. Some
Russ,
other folks.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you, Russ, do you think quite often those of us that are members of industries that are regulated maybe are not always happy that we're regulated? I'll say it that way. But one of the byproducts, one of the real positive byproducts of being a constituent of an industry that is regulated is that you've had to take BCP seriously, that you're evaluated. They review you, the policies and procedures and the steps and plans that you have in place to prepare for disasters. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, look, regulation is kind of like parenting, right? When you're the kid, right, and you look up at a parent and they're being jerks, right? They don't understand, they don't know, they don't have any insight, right? And sometimes maybe that's true, right? But as you grow up and you go down the line and time passes, you realize like, wow, those probably were some things that I needed to do. I just really didn't want to at the time. Maybe I learned from that. Or maybe you don't agree, right? There's still that bucket of stuff that fits there. But I would say that highly regulated industries where you've got, folks looking at what you're doing, asking those difficult questions, and quite frankly, putting, a lot more onus on you to do certain things that, not non-highly regulated companies don't have to deal with. When stuff happens, it usually puts you in a better spot to respond.
Agreed.
So again, is it fun? No. Is it helpful? This time, sure.
Yes. Good point.
So, I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, right, as I look at this, right, we talked through just briefly the change in workday and the change in space and the constraints, right? But at the end of the day, the work didn't change, right? I think we can all agree, the pandemic happened and states closed down when they closed down and travel bans went into play and all the things that had happened that kind of led us up to the 100% work from home. But I think, I can tell you what we found, right? We as a firm had anticipated, maybe a slowdown in production, right? Just not really sure what to deal with, right? And I don't think we got what we expected, right? I think we wound up better than we expected. I think people responded better than I guess we expected because no one really knew what was coming, right? We were just like, hey, what does this mean? Like we went and shifted everything over, and I think what we found is, people wanted to do the right thing. People worked really hard, sometimes probably harder than they would have during the workday because they didn't have the commute and all the other constraints, and frankly, they didn't have a lot else to do. So they stayed in front of their computer maybe a little bit longer than they would have. But in that same vein, I'm saying that nothing changed. Pretty much everything changed. When you look at it in terms of people, process, technology, right? A lot of firms, when you're economy slowing down and you're not getting as much transaction level revenue, you're not getting as much, just the economy itself is shrinking. Lots of folks had compression, right? They had reductions in force, they had layoffs. When you're running a lean business and all of a sudden, top line goes down, bottom line has to go down, expenses have to go down with it. So there's not a lot of juice to squeeze, so to speak. So, some of those reductions in force, even one or two people, was an issue. And again, we'll talk about some current events in a few minutes, but when you're talking about some of these organizations that are facing, reductions in force, those people, as they're being reduced and being canceled out, from a cyber perspective, become potential insider threats, right? Is there, knowing that this is coming, or, disenfranchised, or think that it's coming and things like that, they kind of represent additional exposure. From a process perspective, processes didn't wholesale change, but I think what happened when you go from everyone working in an office and you have a certain way of doing things and documenting things and talking to one another, now all of a sudden, is there processes that change? Are there internal controls that used to be in place, but due to the need for workplace flexibility and, timing and availability, personnel availability and scheduling, did those processes or controls change or slow down, or did you, implement new workarounds to different processes and, or open things up from a technology perspective to say, hey, well, everybody's going to be working from home, so now we have to accept, this type of traffic, or this thing's getting blocked on this person's machine, and you start kind of trying to problem solve along the way, and some of those controls and safeguards, may have been compromised along the way in, just trying to keep operations flowing.
So Russ, if I can just jump in here and ask you, a question, because you've covered a lot of really important points. How do smaller organizations manage this whole process? That's one thing if you're with a larger company and that larger company has the advantage of being able to specialize within its IT department. But sometimes smaller companies don't have that luxury, and you have one or two or three individuals wearing multiple hats. And this is a specialized area within IT, no? And it crosses over into other areas like auditing. So what's your advice for smaller companies?
Yeah, there's no canned answer for that, right? I'd love to tell you that there's a magic pill or secret sauce that's just going to get you to where you want to get to. And look, I think bigger companies, even though they have the resources, right, they're like turning a cruise ship, right? It's big as hell, it's cumbersome, it takes a while. And they can do more stuff because they've got more critical mass, they've got more skills and experience, but the changes are also so much bigger that you're talking projects are in terms of years, not weeks. For smaller organizations, the benefit is, hey, you're more nimble, you can react faster. The hurdles are, well, again, you've got the same person that's, closing the books on Friday is, negotiating with IT vendors on Monday and is preparing, investor presentations and things like that on Tuesday. And it is the same person. And, now they've got a help desk issue where they've got to provision, 3 new laptops and give the thumbs up to a bunch of, standing desk orders and, extra computer monitors and there's just the infrastructure that folks need to work from home because they physically aren't allowed into their office building because, the real estate company that owns the building just shut the building down and sent their people home too. So you can't even get your stuff if you wanted to. And now, you're just as much focused on logistics as you are on process. So the short answer is do the best you can, right? Know the things that you can do and can't do and kind of understand all right, we can't change this because, right? We can't do that. And if you're using outside vendors, have very candid conversations with them. But, operations obviously has to happen, right? You need to keep, servicing your clients. You need to keep executing transactions and keep revenue flow going. But you can't do it at the deficit of information security. So it's a really soft answer because folks have a litany of different operating structures, but you've got to do the best you can, but always be mindful of information security.
Okay.
So I would say, though, when I think through that, right, I'm just trying to frame this appropriately. So there are some things, right, that you can do, right? In the middle of a pandemic is not the best time, right? But now I think we've kind of normalized, right? We've load balanced. We've come up to, everybody kind of understands what their role is and how they're operating. But there are really 3 things that I would tell any organization, right? I don't care if it's, 5 people and a dog, right, that make up the company, or if it's 500 people and no dogs, right? And those 3 things, right? One is to know your crown jewels, right? And what I mean by that is know what's important to your organization from a cyber perspective, right? If you know what's important, right? Whether it's, personally identifiable information, what folks refer to as PII, or how it's defined sometimes as non-public information or private information, things like that. Second is to increase your cybersecurity maturity, right? And I know that there's a lot of iddies on the back end of that, right? But
what does that mean?
So there's different frameworks that you can implement, right, from a cyber perspective that look at your entire program, look at your entire entity, and help you focus by doing a risk assessment and then implementing that framework to say, hey, here's what's important to us, right? So that's why I talked about crown jewels. And then here's what we're doing about it, right? And instead of a pass-fail, right, certification type mindset, which I think a lot of people get hung up on, this is really, establishing your baseline, saying, hey, here's where we're at. and then looking at a future state and saying, here's what we want to get to, here's what we're good at, right? Here's the things that we do well already, and then here's how we're going to get to where we want to get to, and just kind of continually grow along that maturity spectrum, as opposed to saying, we're the best, we have cybersecurity absolutely covered. And I'd say the third thing, right, is cybersecurity awareness, right? There's a quote that we use probably too much, but attribute it back to this gentleman named David Schneier, way back from 2000, right? And it's still just as relevant today as it was then. And he says, amateurs go after technology, professionals go after people, right? People are always going to be your biggest risk from a cyber perspective. You can have the best program, you can have the best tools, right? But people are still going to click on things they shouldn't. They're still going to go and use, web-based information sharing sites or portals, when they shouldn't, if it's easier, right? They're going to engage in questionable web traffic, right? They're going to install things on their machines that they shouldn't. Sometimes it'll be something to help their kid go to school and they only have one machine at home. Sometimes it'll just be a matter of convenience or them doing something that they want to do. But I think the general rule is, look, people want to do the right thing, right? They know what the right thing is to do when they're asked, but given the pressures from business, given distractions, working from home and kids at school, and the volume of communication, right? I mean, I never realized how many coffee companies that I've given my information to, from Dunkin' to Starbucks to Gregory to 7 or 8 others that wanted to tell me what the hell they were doing with my information during the middle of a global pandemic. Just all that volume of stuff, like something bad can, is much more likely to happen. So
if I can just ask a question on that.
Sure.
We're seeing a heightened level of traffic, right? We're all getting more emails. We're getting emails from people we know or people we think we know. And that reminds me of this topic, phishing. Okay, phishing is still probably the quickest way, the easiest way for someone with nefarious intent to get into your system. Is that true?
I mean, it's a volume-based game, right? The beauty of phishing is its simplicity, right? And it's the whole keep it simple, stupid. Is the more stuff you throw over the fence, the more stuff you're going to get back in return. I mean, we've done facilitated phishing sessions before, and the companies that we partner with to do that tell us that the results that we've seen are reflective of what they see all the time, right? There's a handful of people that'll click on just about anything you throw in front of them. There's a handful of people that'll report everything that gets thrown in front of them, even some stuff that is reasonable traffic.
I've gotten to the point where I don't click anything on. I mean, if it's a response to my email, I'll open it. And sometimes I get stuff from sources that look like they're familiar, but I'm not quite sure. So I don't open them anymore. Maybe that's the other extreme. That's not so good either.
I can tell you that just a quick anecdote as we're going through. So one of the buildings I have access to, right, the building management had implemented this smartphone QR code access for the gates, right, for the security gates that go through. And I was like, wow, that's okay, but it doesn't work for your space itself. You still need your RFID card for that. So I looked at it and I'm like, wow, that sounds like something somebody would click on, but that sounds stupid. Like, why would somebody have to have their card to get into their space, but use their phone to get through the security gates to get to the elevator bank? I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, why would you have to do a second thing instead of just taking out your card one step earlier and getting on the elevator bank? So not only did I think it was dumb, right? And if whoever invested in the company that made that platform is on here, I apologize for bad mouthing it. But I was like, wow, that's really silly. So I reported it as just phishing. I was like, there's no way that's real. Like, that doesn't even make sense to do. And apparently we blocked it. We blocked the whole message firm-wide. And then I found out that it was actually a real message. Somebody did it, and the building was implementing it, and they had to then rescind the fact that I had blocked this firm-wide to do it. Look, it happens. I get caught in it as well. I always err on the side of skepticism. And, if somebody wants to punish me for trying to do the right thing, I'm willing to take that 100 times out of 100. But I guess maintaining that level of skepticism, I guess, is important. But at the same time, look, everybody knows about the Twitter push, right? And I'm not bad mouthing them. I'm not saying they did anything wrong. but they had 130 high-end, accounts from Joe Biden to Barack Obama to Elon Musk and Bill Gates, and their response, right, was saying that attackers successfully manipulated a small number of employees and used their credentials to access Twitter's internal systems, including getting through our two-factor protections. So one of two things happened. Either there was a really successful phish that breached their multi-factor authentication, or they were able to corrupt somebody as a bad actor to obtaining those credentials and then using them, right? So highly likely, social engineering components of that and getting those credentials. I mean, again, that was one. I think when the pandemic first started, there was, attacks against the WHO and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and National Institutes of Health. It's flavor of the week, but, the more stuff that gets thrown over, the more that gets compromised and the more that becomes usable out there. So, yeah, I would say culturally, just showing people what good looks like, reminding them of the fact that the next message they get is probably, there's a chance it's going to be malicious, and it's either going to try and execute some file on your PC and, have some sort of ransomware, or it's going to ask you for a set of credentials it's going to then turn around and use against you or exfiltrate your data. But at the same time, I'd say it doesn't have to be scary, right? There's a training component to your people that, if you make it to where it's approachable and don't do this doom and gloom approach, right? You give them some micro learning sessions, do some phishing testing, kind of, even if they fail it, kind of remind them what good looks like and go through it and be more carrot than stick. I think you're probably in a better spot.
Okay. So would you say we sort of run through the maturity assessment and why it's important?
Yeah, so the maturity assessment, I would say, and this is perfect for smaller organizations, right? Because you can't measure yourself against the big companies. It's just not reasonable, right? Because again, to your point earlier, they've got teams of people to do what is a part-time job for somebody at a smaller organization. So it allows you to, I said before, do a risk assessment, right? So understand where your crown jewels are, understand where the really important stuff is, and then say, okay, what can happen to it and how are we protecting it? And then you do the maturity assessment where, you align. We like to refer people to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So NIST stands for National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they came out with a cybersecurity framework. It's industry agnostic, but it's been widely accepted across industries. It was originally intended for critical infrastructure, was rolled out during the Obama administration, has since been accepted in a lot of other industries. And most of the financial services regulations align very closely with NIST as well, whether it's NYDFS or the NAIC. A lot of the SEC's guidance has, flavors that are pulled straight out of NIST as well. So again, widely accepted, pretty easy to use, really more in like a layperson's type of terms, right? And it breaks it down into cybersecurity into 5 categories, right? There's identify, which is tell us what you have, right? That's the crown jewels piece of it. There's protect, which means, put all your controls in place, tell us how you're protecting everything. And then the last 3 all kind of go together. It's detect, respond, and recover. So it's detect when something's happening, right? Respond to it in a timely manner and recover back to normal operation. And I think it's important to understand when you're doing that maturity assessment, right? It's, hey, 40% of this is tell us what you have, put a good program in place to protect it. But the other 60% is be able to understand when something happens and how to get back, right? So I think it's built in that the understanding is things can happen, but how you respond is just as important. So going through that maturity assessment and saying, here's where we're really good, right? We've got this covered. Maybe we don't need to spend any more time or money in that area. But then as you go down the line, here's some other areas that we could probably get better at and bring it up to our own personal baseline, right? So we're in line with ourselves as opposed to comparing yourself to an organization that really, maybe you're in the same business, but structurally and infrastructure-wise, you're very dissimilar. It gives you that ability to continue to measure against yourself. And then it's always about betterment, right? It's not you have to achieve this minimum threshold or you have to continue up here to this, level of excellence. It's here's what's going to make us better, right? Perfect, maybe not, but better, right? Because I'm here to tell you, right? The most mature cybersecurity organizations, these, federal alphabet soup type organizations have, massive budgets and cadres of people dedicated to cybersecurity, and they still get breached. Some of which get breached through phishing messages and downloads of malicious content and compromised credentials. So as good as they are, as much money and time and effort as they put towards it, right, they're still exposed too. So the detect, respond, recover components of that are just as important for them as they are for you.
So Russ, it almost sounds, to go back to your quote or reference to David Schneier, at the end of the day, it's more about people than it is about equipment, so to speak. And I think the theme that you're hitting on is that it's about developing or building a culture of cybersecurity awareness within an organization, whether that organization has got 100,000 employees or 10 employees or maybe one employee. How do you do this? How do you inculcate within the members of the organization a culture of cybersecurity awareness?
Yeah, I mean, if you can tell me, like, just do me a favor, bottle it and sell it, because seriously, look, it's the most important part of cybersecurity, but it's also the hardest, right? Everybody who's been through an acquisition or who's changed companies, right, has understood that concept of culture and changing culture and how hard it is to change it. I've mentioned some of the tactics on it already, right? The showing folks what good looks like, right? Going through the phishing exercises, and not just your standard, hey, here's a $10 coffee card, click on this link, but maybe some more sophisticated stuff down the line, for numbers 2 and 3 and 4 to, be some internal messaging about, office reopenings and things like that are relevant, that people are going to want to click on. They're going to want to find out, like, hey, are we due back at the office, right? But make it, to where they can catch it, make it towards an external email address and some of those other things, but being able to test folks and say, hey, here's stuff that you're gonna see. Like, please have the appropriate level of skepticism. Partnering with an organization to do some micro learning, right? A lot of these companies, whether it's KnowBe4 or Tata or any of those that put out these curriculum of these 2 to 3 minute videos, and some of them are really kind of actually a little bit funny. It's a good break in the middle of the day to watch and just remind you of, here's some stuff that that people, they fall for on a regular basis. So just, here it is, here's what it looks like. Yes, it seems silly in the video, but you're gonna get one of these emails and you should have that level of skepticism. I mean, I can tell you a number of stories of people that felt some sort of pressure to be in a situation and did something, right, that wound up hurting the company. I mean, whether it's an executive who travels, right, who boasts about his dinners and resorts and who he's hanging out with on social media, that a bad actor then snaps that down and does a custom spearfish back to their organization saying, hey, I'm at this place, at this hotel, had dinner with these people at this restaurant, right? All those facts check out because the person was on social media telling you how cool they were. And my credit card got, compromised or whatever. I'm at this conference for another day or two. And I know the concept of conferences is a little off for us now because we're all sitting at our dining room tables in our offices at home. But hey, my stuff got compromised. Can you send me $20,000 to cover expenses for the rest of the thing? And I'll get my credit card squared away when I get home. I can tell you, I know a company that sent that, right? And I know they sent the money, and that money was gone. I know other companies that receive very similar messages about, wire transfers or payments to different things, and not until they stopped to say, hey, this seems like it should be right, but let me just ask and confirm. And that last second confirmation saved them whatever money they were going to send.
Russ, the point you make about ongoing learning and for firms to partner with companies that provide these curriculums, I can say firsthand that I have found them to be beneficial. And I will tell you that I never liked taking these little classes, but I always find, whether it has to do with compliance or cybersecurity or some other topic, that I generally walk away with an insight that I didn't think I had before, or probably didn't have before. So I would agree with you. I think as a member of the industry, having access to these types of resources can help make us better citizens in this sense. No question about it.
Yeah, I guess last point on that one, right, is I would say that, a lot of folks do cybersecurity or information security training with an online hour-long video and 10 questions, or to be able to evidence that they did it, right? And
Yep.
great, we have to do this training again because this regulation says we have to, or this is what the regulators expect, or this is what everybody else is doing and stuff. And it's a battle, right? It's how do you evidence that you do it, right? And make sure you can support the fact that you've at least provided that required training to folks versus how do you change behavior, right? And evidencing an hour-long training is easy. Changing behavior is really hard. But the only way you can do it is to be diligent and just continue to remind people of here's the stuff you're going to see, here's what it's going to look like, and here's what you can do about it. And it's a collection of phishing training, the micro learning and videos, whenever there's an all hands or a town hall, just, maybe spend a couple of minutes on, hey, here's some stuff you could be seeing, and here's some stuff we blocked already that came through. If you see some stuff similar to that, maybe throw a shout out to somebody who reported a couple of, the more sophisticated phishing messages that didn't get caught in a web filter, and say, hey, great job, be more like that person, whatever that is. That's going to help you. It's going to help you a lot more than spending, another $5,000 on a tool that may or may not work.
So if I may, let me just ask you one follow-up question before we move forward.
Sure.
On phishing, and I disclosed a moment ago that sometimes I don't open enough emails because I'm afraid of the source. Is it okay to go to the URL of the, and I think that's the right term. So if john.smith@abc.com sends me an email, and it looks familiar, but I'm not quite sure. I don't open it up, but I take the cursor and I hover it over his name to see what his email address is, to see if it looks like it's a legitimate email. If I do that, have I let them in? Or is it a good way to detect whether or not, or to assess whether or not it's from a bona fide sender?
I mean, if you scroll your cursor over and don't click on the web address, it'll show you what the actual email address is, because they can,
Yes.
user can mask it. But just very clearly, do not click on a link that's in an email. Do not go to an unknown URL. Like if you have to look it up, right? Chances are, it's probably not good. If it's from if it's from a company, right? So some of these I guess you call it a campaign, right? But some of this activity we've seen, what it is you'll get a third-party vendor, right, who you work with, and you'll get a bad actor who goes to that third party's webpage and sees your logo on there as, hey, this is who works with us. This is one of our clients, right? And that service organization loves telling people who their clients are because they want, your competitors to work with them as well, right? So they use your information as a marketing tool. So what these bad actors do is they go to the service organization's website, they look at who they work with. So now they have a client list that they can use to target for phishing, right? Then they go to that and see, if it's regional sales directors, if it's local sales directors, between, hey, work with us, have someone contact you, and they enter in, some information to the contact you box, and they get reached out to by one of the salespeople, or they go on LinkedIn and confirm the salespeople's information. And then they put together a phishing message to whether it's change in payment terms and sending you wire instructions, or send a message as if you're the replacement for that other person that was your contact at that service organization, and use it to either exfiltrate data, to get you to process a fraudulent wire transaction. These are things that happen all the time, and this is your third parties that you're trusting to go out and push out this information, and a bad actor taking their business development activity using your logos and going to market with it against you, and trying to exfiltrate either data or money out of your accounts.
Yeah, not a good thing. So Russ, in the remaining time that we have, and before we get to some of your insights and perspectives on regulations, are there any other topics, any other things related to cybersecurity that people in our audience should be cognizant of?
Yeah, I think there's two big things that I would hit on, right? One is I've said a lot about showing people what good look like, right, and training them on it, reminding them. I think the
Yes.
one thing we all need to be mindful of, right, is that good behavior needs to be the easy option because it sounds so silly, right? But if you want employees to do the right thing, you need to make it the easy thing as well, right? Because if it's hard to do or there's an easier workaround, right, that's just going to save them time, that's going to save them effort. The people are going to follow, just like water and electricity, right? They're going to follow the path of least resistance, right? They're going to do what is easiest to do. So if you're talking about deploying a mobile device management, right, for BYOD, or you're talking about encryption of hard drives, or using a encrypted file transfer site for transferring data, whatever those things are, making it as user-friendly as possible. So that way your people don't try and find workarounds or don't try and bastardize the system to do something other than what it was designed to do. And I know
Okay.
that it sounds so easy, but I think we're always so focused on cost and capabilities that oftentimes we look past the quote unquote user experience that we all look at from a revenue perspective, right? Like, how do we generate revenue? How do we make it easier for our customers to do business with us so that they want to do more? I think we got to adopt that same mindset when we're looking at cybersecurity tools and solutions and programs and policies to say, how do we make it as easy as possible for our people to do the right thing, right? That should be a consideration. So that's one. The second part is what I talked about with NIST, right? The whole detect, respond, recover. Prepare for it, for when, not if. All right. I mean, we talk about cybersecurity, at companies in terms of there's two types of companies, right? There's companies that know they've been breached and companies that don't know they've been breached, right? And I mean, really, at this point, with the volume of activity out there and the for-profit bad actors that are for hire, right? And then the people that are just hobbyists, so to speak, and then the nation-state bad actors, whether it's China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, insert scary country here. There's a lot of bad activity that's out there that people are, trying to phish your messages, that are trying to get you to, click on a link and lock down your network and hold it for ransom, that are trying to, install a honeypot and gather up all your data and exfiltrate it and then either sell it or sell it back to you or hold it ransom or whatever they're trying to do, right?
Russ, what's a honeypot?
That's just a term in cybersecurity that it's a program that runs inside of your network that is used to aggregate all the data inside of your network, and it just sits there. It doesn't do anything, right? Until it does something, and which is exfiltrate all your data. So it's essentially just a bad actor's repository for all your information. So you won't see any, network traffic heading out from it or whatever until it decides to go. So yeah, it's just another tool that bad actors can use against you.
Okay, and how would you know if you had such a device implanted within your system?
Well, it's not just specific to that. I would say, look, the way to identify any malicious activity, any executables and things like that, there's a variety of different tools, right? You've got to have layered security at all fronts, and you've got to be paying attention to what's running, right? So this really starts all the way back up at the filtering level from email filtering of all your traffic that comes through, looking for those types of files and executables. It's your intrusion prevention, intrusion detection that's running all those scans on all the network traffic that's coming through. That's looking at your network drives. You've got to look at vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, and looking at versions of all your different applications and things that are running in the background to look at all the different traffic that's coming through, and then any other types of ongoing monitoring and um, scans that are happening out in the background to make sure that you've got a good handle on everything that's happening.
Okay.
And there's no one way to find stuff that's going on.
Yeah. So let's say that I'm a member of an organization that's, we're 3 men and a dog. And we operate over a deli in Greenwich. There's no one that's part of my team, our team, that has this expertise to do this. What type of a vendor do we reach out to perform this function, this security function? What, you don't need to give me a name, but what type? Is this something you do, for example?
No. We would, anytime that someone's looking for this type of service, it's called a managed service provider. So there's a lot of different organizations out there, a lot of great people that offer a variety of different services. They do everything from, and actually I'll do the quick correction. They do everything from honeypotting, which I misused the word a moment ago. It's actually putting data files out there for people to actively go out and look for. They do the intrusion prevention, the intrusion detection. They do, firewall rule monitoring. They do vulnerability assessments. They do penetration testing. They do what's called, watching glass. They watch all the transactions that are flowing. They do, network traffic monitoring, looking at spikes of traffic in terms of volume from different IP addresses internally. They do port scanning and all the other things that security companies do. Again, we have folks that we like and work with, that we refer folks to. There's a lot of other folks we've met in the marketplace that we haven't had a chance to work with yet that do great things as well. The one thing I would say, though, is, look, everyone's got a perspective, and it's all based on their experience. It's all based on what they've seen. It's all based on what they've done, the tools that they use, and things like that. And everybody's going to tell you why they're the best, right? And the more folks you talk to, the more you realize that, okay, well, this organization may be the best at thing A, and the other organization may be the best at thing B, and the other one may be the best at thing C. And so everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses, and you've got to look at your skill sets internally, what you can do, what you can't do, and find the right partner for you that's going to meet your needs.
So it sounds to me, Russ, like you might be a good resource for some of our members to contact if they felt they had they wanted to talk to someone about this issue to make sure that they were secure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we do more on the governance side, doing the maturity assessment type of work, looking at programs as a whole. But when it comes to technical things like that and actually doing a lot of the technical monitoring and running a security operations center, can definitely point folks in the right direction if they need it. Okay,
excellent. So again, in the remaining moments that we have, we're coming up on our hard stop. Let's talk about cybersecurity from a regulatory perspective. Is there anything on the horizon that companies, that firms should be aware of?
Yeah. So obviously, GDPR came through, California privacy came through. Other states are putting out their own state-based privacy regulations. In New York, the New York Shield Act was passed into law in 2019, I believe, went active in March of 2020, went live. I think there's a grace period for compliance, but don't quote me to the actual dates on that. But it basically expanded New York General Business Law 899, what formerly was AA, now it included a BB section, and AA was about data breaches and privacy, and the B section now talks about the needs for an information security program. So everything from administrative safeguards to the business, right? So looking at information security from a governance perspective, things like a chief information security officer, a risk assessment, internal controls, training your employees, vendor management, those sorts of things, to kind of the more technical IT security safeguards, right? So we talked through the managed service stuff before, like network security, application security, data flows, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, that sort of stuff. And then, the physical safeguards, right, around data, right? So data classification, storage, retention, data destruction, those sorts of things. So there's some pretty rigid requirements there in the New York Shield Act that they came out with and said, hey, If you do business with New York residents, so if you possess private information of New York residents, regardless of whether you're in New York or have a physical presence in New York, you have to comply with this. So pretty wide reaching for companies that deal with folks who live in New York, that are New York residents. So there's a lot of exposure there, I'd say, out in the marketplace. And because the go live dates coincided with a global pandemic, I'd say it probably wasn't on top of the news ticker. So I think there's probably some folks who have exposure to it that may not know. If you deal with some good folks from an accounting or legal advisory perspective, they probably were out there letting you know about it. But yeah, it's a pretty serious regulation that's out there, and impacts a lot of companies. There is some good news, right? So if you already comply with Graham-Leach-Bliley or HIPAA or high tech or the New York Department of Financial Services cybersecurity law, and there's some other exceptions as well, you don't have to make additional notifications that would have already been in excess of what's already required from those regulations. But in terms of data breaches, there is still breach requirements relating to that law. So again, not as well known as some of the other regs, but it is pretty wide reaching.
Okay. So if I could ask you to sum things up in, let's say, 5 to 10 sentences, what would you do? Let's begin with crown jewels. What would you tell people about the crown jewels?
I mean, I very simply, look, it's a data flow exercise. It's a whiteboard, right? And literally just sit down on a whiteboard with somebody who knows how to conduct these data flow sessions, and just look at how you receive data, how it comes in, right? Whether it's in person, whether it's an email, whether it's through some sort of online portal, all the way through, right? How you process it and transact it, flow that out, where it lives on your network, and then where it goes to. Any third parties or fourth parties that you use, or again, vendors of vendors, and understand kind of how far out that data goes and follow it down the rabbit hole as far as you can. And then document along that data flow how you're protecting it along the way. So again, if it's an encrypted portal as opposed to email, right? So you're documenting how the traffic comes in. If you're talking about deployment of encryption for external, traffic, so you're sending information to a service organization, how are you sending it to them? Is it, through some sort of interface with their system, or is it through just some sort of messaging, and how's that protected? Things like that. So that's going to be super important, just being able to document in one place, like, here's all the data and what we do with it. Okay.
And so, Russ, as you're speaking here, we've gotten some questions in from the audience, because I know we only have a couple of minutes left.
Sure.
Regarding cybersecurity awareness, speak to that for a second. What should organizations do to train their people?
Yeah, again, I think we went through most of this already, right? I think it's just a matter of, identifying what good behavior looks like, right? Know your people and know how mature they are already, and give them exposure to things, right? Phishing tests are a solid way to remind people that, the threats are out there. Different videos and learning tools, right? And if you feel obligated or you have a regulatory requirement to do the annual training, right? The video with the tests and things like that is good as well. But I think it's just a constant reminder of what good looks like there, right? But yeah, and I'll stop there.
Okay.
The most important thing is to just continually touch on.
I'm sorry, continuously touch on?
Just continually touch on, reminders of, different threats and what good looks like, is just to not do it just to do it, right? If you want to increase cybersecurity maturity and you want to remind people what good looks like, you need to be consistent, and it needs to be timely, right? It's not a, flurry of activity and then it sits for 9 months. It's, every couple of weeks, every month, every 6 weeks, whatever that is, whatever that frequency you can get away with to get out in front of them. The more frequent touch points, the more frequent reminders, the better off you are.
And Russ, there's another call from the audience, or rather a question. How should they know who to call from a, let's say, a regulatory standpoint, cyber carrier, cyber forensics specialist, and so on and so forth? Is that something you might be able to help guide people toward if they reached out to you?
It is. I mean, there's certain components of it that should exist already, right? So some cyber liability coverages have things like breach coaches, cyber forensics folks that are included as part of the policy. Some don't. Some folks, can reach out directly to cyber forensic folks, but I mean, any questions along those paths. I mean, I'm not going to go reviewing insurance policies and things like that. But at the same time, if you have a question about who I should call from a, attorney or again, any of those types of service providers relating to cyber, definitely reach out. Again, nuts and bolts. It should really be part of the incident response plan for all those things. So as you're going through the incident response plan, that whole detect, respond, recover thing we talked about before, having the phone numbers of, your local FBI agent that's in charge of cybercrime, or the local, NYPD or whoever is in charge of cybercrime that's your contact, having the contact for your cyber liability carrier, having the contact for any third parties and things like that. So when something happens, you've got a call tree of all your outside vendors, having that information in there. So if and when something happens, you can get on the phone and call all the relevant parties right away. That's the more important part of things.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to invite the audience one more time to pose any questions to Russ Summers of Baker Tilly. Well, I can certainly say, Russ, this has been a very interesting and educational session, and we really do appreciate you taking the time to come in here and discuss cybersecurity with us. I do want everyone in the audience to note Russ's contact information right in front of us. So if you have any questions about cybersecurity, et cetera, by all means, please feel free to reach out. By the way, just got one more question. Russ, what about personal cybersecurity? Do you have any tips on that, high-level tips on personal cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of the same stuff we talked about holds true, right? If you don't know who's asking you for information, don't give it to them. If you don't know who's sending you a link to click on, don't do it. Don't go to websites that have, suspect content, right? Like, try and keep it, as mainstream as possible. Obviously, don't participate in any nefarious activity. And I say that in jest, right? But obviously, there's a certain element of truth to that. I think as far as personal cybersecurity, if you want trouble, if you go looking for trouble, you'll find it. But if you stay with the folks that you know, remember what good looks like as far as sharing information and clicking on links, stay with that, right? If someone calls you and tries to talk to you about any of your information, I don't know, just my personal experience, what I always do is I hang up and I call a number that I know, and go with them directly. I like to be the one to initiate any of those conversations. I don't react when somebody calls me. It's like, hey, I want to talk to you about this thing. And it's like, I don't know you from Adam and I didn't solicit your call. So, no.
Yes. Well, Russ, that makes perfect sense, as has everything else you've said today. So I do want to thank Russ Summers of Baker Tilly for coming in to talk to us about this very important and timely topic. And again, I do want to remind everyone that Russ's contact information is on the screen right in front of you. That's russell.summers@bakertilly.com. So again, Russ, thanks again for being a good sport and coming in to educate us. I do also, just a housekeeping point, I'd like to remind everyone that our August event, which will be held on August 11th, will feature William Dudley, the former New York Federal Reserve president and former FOMC vice chair, and he'll be joining us to talk about a wide topic, or wide array of topics, rather, regarding the market and obviously what the Federal Reserve might do. So we'll be talking about the economic outlook, the Fed, and the implications for financial markets. So please look to the website for more detailed information about that. That's tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, August 11th. Tuesday, August 11th, and I believe that also will be at noon. So we certainly look forward to having Bill Dudley join us. And once again, Russ, thanks so much for joining us. And to those of you in the audience, enjoy the hot summer and stay safe. And until we meet again next month, have a good day, folks. Bye-bye now.